Are we ready to get started?
Yes, and anyone that is with us and is using a cell phone should do *6 to unmute. But I think everybody will do a roll call. I think we're only missing one, so.
Okay. Should we start with the Pledge of Allegiance as set forward on the agenda? Even though we're remote, I think we can pull that off. And I think it would be fitting to do so. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and let's start with I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Kelly, do you want to call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Berquist, Ms. Castillo, Mrs. Corso, Ms. Guerra,
Here.
Mr. Jones,
Here.
Mr. Crosser,
I'm here.
Mr. Lamarca, Mr. Mack,
Here.
Mr. Meredith, Mr. Meredith, you out there?
Yep, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, thank you. Mr. Milkey,
Yep.
Ms. Murray,
Here.
Ms. Sortino,
Present.
Mr. Whalen,
Here.
and Mrs. Yandel. She's just having a little bit of difficulty signing on as well, so she hopefully will be with us.
Okay. So, and Kelly, you indicated that Miss Castile and
Mrs. Corso.
Ms. Corso were not going to make it. So, okay, so we're waiting for potentially Jeff Berquist and Tom Lamarca. Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. So the first item of business for tonight's meeting is the approval of minutes. And we have two sets of minutes, one from March 5th, 2020, and one from March 11th, 2020. Kelly had circulated those in advance of this meeting. And so let's take them one at a time. So the March 5th, 2020 meetings, I would open it up for any suggestions, corrections, or comments on those minutes. Okay, hearing none, we would entertain a motion and a second to approve those those minutes as submitted.
Drew Meredith moves to approve.
Connor Whalen, second.
Okay, thanks, fellas. So motion and second. Any further comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay, great. All right, next, then let's take the
Moves to accept.
David Mack, second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any further comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Tom Lamarca.
Tom just joined. That was him
Okay.
just joining.
Okay, got it. Okay, welcome, Tom.
Well, thanks. I cannot get us on YouTube for some reason, so I'm available only via the phone. I don't like that.
All right, well, we're all getting used to the technological world here, so we'll do the best we can. So glad that you could join. Just to bring you up, so far we've done the roll call, and we just did the approval of the March 5th and the March 11th, 2020 minutes. And so that will catch you up to item number 4 on our agenda, which is audience participation.
Thank you. I think Jeff Berkowitz is still trying to get on too.
Yeah, we noted that is at the outset that you guys were trying to get on. So when he gets on, we'll catch him up. Hopefully he'll be able to get on here shortly. So
Thank you.
Mr. Milkey, this is
Yes.
Kelly. If I could just interrupt for a second. So I am viewing, it is live streaming. We were about 3 minutes behind on that. So it is actually live streaming, but Mr. Lamarca and the other members are only allowed to communicate in this meeting through this means that I sent to you, this link that I sent to you. But it is showing live.
Okay. All right, excellent. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. And so the next thing is audience participation. And Mrs. Kresser, would you read the communications into the record?
Participant is now joining.
Hold on a second. Is that Jeff Berquist?
Yes. Can we see who just joined? Identify yourself, please. Is that Kima?
Kima.
Yep. Okay. That's Kima.
All right, great. So we're still waiting for Jeff. Okay, great. I didn't know who you want to read these correspondence into the, or these comments into the meeting. I can, or you, what's your pleasure?
Either way.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So we have two comments submitted, and per the protocols that we set up in the earlier meetings, at the beginning of each meeting, we will take audience participation, and then we also take it at the end. That way, we allow people to, if they have something to come, and it's centered around those items that we'll be reviewing that night. And so, in this case, it will be Charter Section 17 through 43. And we have an input from Tim Schwanger, who he's asked for us to read into the record. And his first comment is on Section 25, Expenditures. Suggest this stay the same. It was increased from 5,000 to 10,000 in 2020 and keeps the public in the loop on how their money is being spent via ordinance and resolution approval at the City Commission table. A second comment on Section 32, powers and duties of the city manager. Combining or splitting departments should be subject to approval of the city commission. Creation of new positions such as the safety service director and assistant city manager positions should also be subject to approval by the city commission. A third comment, Section 43, general disqualifications should remain the same to guard against city employees and city commissioners from lowballing city contracts to pad their own projects or business. And so I've tried to read those verbatim as they were set in via email to Ms. Kresser. We do have another input from the public from Sharon Johnson. And it's related to certifications of funds, Section 22 of the charter. Clarification. I would to see written in the charter a provision for showing an account number directly on the financial certification that is attached with every piece of spending legislation that the commissioners approve. What good is it to certify funding when the account fund is missing from the certification? Thank you, Sharon Johnson. Ms. Kresser, is there any other correspondence that you received or inputs that need to be read into the record at this time?
Mr. Chairman, no, there were not. Just those two.
Okay. Okay, great. And we also, just as a quick point of order, we have also said that we'll receive those comments on an informational basis and not a conversational basis. So we're going to take that information into consideration in our deliberations as we work through the charter, but it's not intended to be a debate, so there's no need for us to comment on those submittals at this point, other than to take them into consideration as we move through the agenda this evening. So with that, just a couple of setup points, given the nature of the electronic meeting here, one of the things that we talked about that we would do, and I think this is consistent with what we did the last meeting, is we'll go through each section and we'll try to figure out which ones there are no changes to, which ones the group feels that more information would be beneficial to help clarify issues and then to make a decision, and which ones we want to just set aside for further discussion, maybe in a better environment where there can be people in the same room. And so we follow that protocol tonight as we move through Section 17 of the Charter to Section 43. And then just to keep us in sync, the last meeting we did a similar thing, and we set aside Section 1B, which was the reference to gender, Section 2, which is the form of government, Section 4, the qualifications, and section 6, salary and bonds, and then sections 13, 14, 15, and 16, which all had to do with the ordinance enactment or publication. So those are the ones that we've set aside that we have on our to-do list. And so I think what we'll do is we'll go through tonight, and then we'll see how many more we put on that to-do list. Then we can kind of decide what for our next meeting, depending. I think our next meeting is on May 13th, so it probably won't be in person, or we know it won't be. So we may follow the same process there, in the hopes that eventually we will be able to congregate in the same room. So I'll pause there and see if there's any comments or questions on that process, but I did want to just lay out that process to make sure there's no trouble with that. Okay, hearing none, then our first, we will go through the first one would up tonight is section 17 of the charter, which is law director and assistants. And so I will put it out to the group. Are there any comments, questions, inputs that people have received with regard to section 17 of the city charter that someone would like to bring for this group for further discussion?
Tom Lamarca here.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
When it comes to the law director working at the pleasure of the city manager versus working for the commissioners, it's the tail wagging the dog. And I would like to see that, and others have requested that I mention it, that we go back to the law director answering to the commissioners, the city manager being second in line. And because as it is right now, the city manager could hire his sister-in-law or his sister as the law director, and he or she could do whatever they wanted as long as no one spoke up. There's really no policing on it. That's what I'm told.
Okay.
And that's what I see.
Mr. Milky,
All right.
Connor Whalen here.
Yep, please go ahead.
I just thought I would chime in because I was on the charter review committee that changed that from the law director, and the next one we're going to get to 18, the finance director, also both used to answer to the commission instead of the manager. And we changed it. I can tell you the main purpose was we felt that there was some trouble with the law director and the finance director both feeling that they did not need to cooperate and be informative on when requested from the city manager. So the idea was to create, as most of the positions are, that they directly report to the manager. And I do believe that the hiring needs to be approved by the city commission. I don't believe that I'm pulling up the charter right now, but I am pretty sure that when I read this earlier,
I believe that.
yeah, so it has to be approved by the commission, but as far as the day-to-day, who those people answer to, they answer to the manager and not the commission, because if they only have to keep the commission happy, then there is no real reason to answer to the manager, who's the guy in charge of making things go. So that's something we changed last year. I was on that if anybody else wonders anything about it, why we changed it.
Okay, that's very helpful background, and just as a point of emphasis to what you just said, the section 17 does require that the opener is the city manager with the concurrence of a majority of the members of the city commission shall appoint a law director. And so your point is well taken on that. Just make sure that we have that clarification into how they're get in the commission's level of oversight in the initial appointment. But that's helpful background. So I'm going to pause here for a second, see if that's generated any other comments And just as a reminder, if you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute. And if you want to speak, make sure you take it off of mute. So, so are there any other comments that were generated related to this issue of the law director, essentially the law director reporting to the city manager after a appointment with the concurrence of the city commission? Okay, so you know, on this issue, I suppose this is an issue that we can kind of put in the parking lot for a moment in terms of we can come back to that. But before I do that, are there any, you know, I know this environment is difficult to do this in, but if anyone, I want to make sure that, you know, we're getting people to talk here and not just, you know, kind of going through and because it's difficult to medium to communicate in, that we're not getting all the feedback that we need. And so I don't know if do anybody else on the committee have a strong feeling that this is a provision that should be revisited in terms of its reporting criteria as Mr. LaMarca has described it?
The last charter this is Kurt Crusser. The last
Okay.
charter review changed it for a specific reason. We've got to give it some time to see if it works. I haven't had any issues or anybody come to me about any issues with how the system was set up 5 years ago. I feel we got to give it some running time and see how it works, and it seems like it's working so far so good. So I think the move was a good move, and I don't have any issues with it whatsoever.
Okay. Are there others who would like to weigh in?
This is Drew Meredith. I agree with Kurt. I think you have to let this run, and at this time, I see no issues.
5 years, and we have to.
Was that
Some
you,
marriages
Mr.?
last 5 years. I'm sorry.
Whoever that was, that you, Mr. LaMarca, that you cut out. So please restate what you were saying.
I think 5 years has been a strong enough test.
Well, then this is Drew Meredith again. I think it's passed the test, and I say we leave as is.
Okay. Others who would like to weigh in?
One quick question, Connor Whalen again, for Mr. LaMarca. I agree that if this is something that we need to, right now we seem to be hashing out what we're going to look further at and what we're not. So I think that if Mr. LaMarca wants to look further, we should. But I'm curious, you know, in 5 years, in what way hasn't it passed the test? What has been the issue with it?
I think, LaMarca here, I think that it was a challenge finding a law director. We had Trevor sitting there as the assistant for years, and it took a little bit of coaxing to get Trevor to take the job. We have not had any others wanting to step up, and when we were advertising and looking for a law director, no one would submit, or seemed to no one submitted a resume to take that position. So there must be something wrong, from my opinion anyhow. No one else wants that particular job in the city of Sandusky. Is it the way of the framework that is the problem? I'm just throwing it out there. I just don't see I don't think it's the right way. But.
So, Mr. LaMarca, can I ask, do you feel, because as Connor kind of pointed out, Section 18 was changed at the same time that deals with the finance director, who has a similar process where the city manager puts them up for appointment and, approval by the city commission, but then the finance director reports to the city manager as well. Do you have an equal concern about that reporting relationship, or is this more about the law director position, or is it both?
No, you're absolutely correct. I think that both positions, and it's the term of serving at the pleasure of the city manager. So the city manager is the king of the operation of the city. I know we're not here to determine financial conditions and all that, but maybe this is now the time to start also stating the charter that maybe a minimum reserves requirement of 4 to 6 months of operating expenses be there, and begin accumulating that now and use as a last resource means in the event of another pandemic or depression. I don't think that we've been getting a straight shot here as citizens of the city of Sandusky, and I don't see where the citizens have benefited with the current setup, the current alignment. The vice president of the commission stated that we had a $5 million surplus at the end of last year, or reserve, when in fact that it's a cumulative amount. We didn't buy a fire truck because that was shoved over into 2020. I mean, there's some other issues there, and so I don't think we truly had a reserve, and I think that we are upside down. I think that there's some. I think we've got some issues going on.
Okay, so with that in mind, I guess I'll ask. So let's marry these two together. This really falls under the big bucket of the reporting, the finance director and the law director reporting to the city manager. And Mr. LaMarca, this is an important issue that you've raised and your constituents have brought to you. So I want to make sure that if others want to weigh in with respect to any other opinions, that beyond what we've already heard, related to this particular issue, and then we'll put it. I think it merits, as Connor Whalen kind of suggested, that we put this on the list for further discussion. But I don't want to close it out without allowing for any final comments that people would like to make.
I just want to put my 2 cents in. This is Kirk Kresser. It sounds like, Tom has an issue that people aren't going to be, that they don't want to apply for these positions, and probably the biggest thing that popped in my mind, and probably one of the reasons why the last charter review changed it. It's a little easier to work for one guy than it is 7 guys. And when you work for the pleasure of the commission, that's a tough job, and that's a tough job for the city manager. And most normal people just want to work for one fellow rather than 7 fellows. So I'm sticking with what the former review did. I'm good there.
Okay, thanks.
Chairman, if I could just say a few words. This is the city manager.
Yeah, sure. Please do.
Okay. So through the chairman, I think that the experiment, as it was called in the last 5 years, is best if compared to the previous 5 years, to the last 5 years, where we lived under the previous regime as compared to the existing regime. And so I would ask folks to look at our reserve has grown substantially in the last 5 years. I think in each of the last 5 years, the reserve has grown. We've had a net balance. In addition to that, our general obligation bond debt has gone down significantly. So the financial condition of the city has improved. We carry an over 20% reserve on our general fund budget, and we're able to maintain a 20% reserve in the general fund budget, even as the general fund grew from approximately about 16 million a year to over 23 million a year. So we added funds to keep pace with that. As it relates to the law department, we were able to have fewer lawsuits against the city. We lost fewer lawsuits against the city. We have not had one employee, knock on wood, sue the city in the past 5 years. I think if you looked at the 5 previous years to that, you'd find we were embroiled in a lot of lawsuits and lost many of them over that time. And in addition to that, I would say that our costs for outside legal consulting have also been brought down or monitored more closely under the current regime. So I think the data shows you pretty clearly that we've done a good job, not to mention the most important thing is that the outputs in the city have improved dramatically, which I think ultimately the three-headed system that was created before really led to a lot of indecision and ultimately three executives who could stalemate things from happening. I don't think we have that. I think we have a healthy debate internally. I think the finance director feels comfortable standing up to me as well as our current law director. And so, again, I just look at the results of the outputs of what the city's accomplished in attracting investment and improving services, as well as our very specific financial and legal performance over the last 5 years. I think it's really difficult, unless you're making a political argument, to argue it hasn't been an overwhelming success.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that background engender any further comments? Okay, given the volume of the debate here, I think that we will put that on our list to be revisited, just to make sure that that's got a fair hearing. We'll move on then. I think that covers 17 and 18, basically the same issue. That takes us to section 19 of the charter of the accounting procedures. And so I'll pause there and ask for any feedback from the group that you're hearing from the community, or that you would like to offer on behalf of a recommended review or modification of this particular provision, section 19, the accounting procedure. Okay, hearing none, we will put that in the category of not to be changed or considered for change. But I'm going to pause again and make sure that the group is comfortable with that. So speak up if not, if you are not comfortable with that, and we can raise it for discussion, but otherwise we'll move on to section 20. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to section 20, assessments and licenses. The same the same question to this group. Are there any questions, comments, anything brought forward from the community, or that you would like to bring forward for the group to consider with regard to any amendments or changes to section 20, assessments and licenses? Okay, hearing none, we would put that in the category of to remain the same as written. And again, I'll pause and make sure that there's no objection to putting that in that category. Okay, hearing none, we'd move on to section 21, which is payment of claims and the procedure related to that. And again, I will ask for any feedback that you've received from the community or any information that you would like to provide us, or recommendations regarding to the modification or further information related to this provision. And again, it's section 21, payment of claims. Okay, hearing none, I would again recommend that we put that in the category of no recommended change, and I'll pause again to see if there's any objection to that classification at this time. All right. Section 22, certification of funds. We did receive a comment that we read into the record earlier on this from Sharon Johnson. And so I'll open it up again for further feedback that you have from the community, or further information you would like to have, or any comment for modification or change of section 22, certification of funds. Okay, hearing none, I would recommend that we put section 22, certification of funds, in the category of no recommended changes at this time. Hearing no objection, we'll move on to section 23, money in the fund. Again, would ask if anyone has any input that they would like to provide either from the community or for themselves, or any further information that you would like to have brought forward on this provision. Again, we're talking about Section 23, money in the fund. Hearing none.
Chairman Murphy,
Yes.
the only comment I have is that it just seems to be one very long run-on sentence. Damn that, I don't have an issue with it.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes over time, the drafting of these things gets a little unwieldy, but again, we mentioned that the last time. There's some things in the charter that remain in there just because they have to go before the voters to be removed or to be, amended. So sometimes the run-on sentences remain. Okay, having heard that comment, are there any other comments? If not, I would recommend that we put this in the category of no recommended changes, Section 23, money in the fund. Okay? Section 24, emergencies. Again, any input that you've received from the community, any input you would like to give the group, or any further information you would request on this issue, Section 24, emergencies. Okay, hearing none, I would then recommend again that we put that in the category of no recommended changes, Section 24, emergencies. Okay, hearing none. Next, we'll move on to Section 25, expenditures. And there's some limits in here that we had talked about loosely in the past. We did receive a comment on this one from Mr. Schwanger as well that was read into the record. And so I would again ask the group if there's any feedback that they've received from the community on this issue, any feedback they'd like to provide the group from their own perspective, or any additional information that you might want to better understand this provision. So I'll open it up to the floor on that. Section 25, expenditures.
Connor Whalen here.
Yeah.
I know that this is one that we talked a lot about at the last charter review, and I believe this is the one that some at the city had an interest, and some of the city workers, Eric especially, particularly, on raising so that they had more flexibility. I would definitely like to know more about the type of expenditures and the amount of expenditures and what the interest in changing it would be before we just said good. So that's one. This is one that I would like some more information on. Maybe if Eric's still with us, he could let us know what their thoughts are as a start, and then we can go.
I'm here, but I think Trevor Haberger, our law director, was prepared to speak specifically to this tonight, so I would defer to him if Duff is comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Trevor, please let us know your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I think our thoughts in this matter were to tie this to what the Ohio Revised Code does for the county. The counties have up to $50,000, and our thought is to tie it to that as well. There's a lot of time and money spent for a competitive bid for a $11,000 project that just seems weird and unnecessary.
Okay, and so you're talking about in the second paragraph there, when its anticipated expenditure will exceed $10,000, it says right now, formal competitive bidding shall be required. You're suggesting that from the city's perspective, that would be $50,000, and that's consistent with the state, how the state deals with it at the county level? That's
correct. And then there is another mention of 10,000 in the very last paragraph.
Yep.
And what that is that's taking it to commission. We would like to see a similar change to that, but realizing that the competitive bid, it's not really a cost thing there, it's more of a timing thing. If we have to take everything to commission and you have to do 2 reads 30 days, you're talking 2 months out on something. So, people always want us to run like a business, but when we do, we can't.
Okay. And then, what about the $1,000 limitation? Do you have any commentary on that?
If the commission would choose to raise that, that'd be greatly appreciated. But right now, it's not unduly burdensome to
Okay.
just try to get 3 quotes.
Okay, so your primary is in that second paragraph, the one we started with. That is the primary focus, but additional, from the city's perspective, it sounds like additional latitude in those other 2 measures would be helpful in terms of efficiency at the city level.
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay.
And I just want to add one other. Can I just add one other thing?
Sure.
It was kind of our understanding that this would be put in the parking lot, so I'm sure Mr. Klein would like to give more information when you guys discuss it.
Yeah, we definitely will do that. I think Connor, we just want to shape up what the issue is, so for purposes of the minutes, we know what we're coming back to. So we appreciate the feedback, and we definitely will put this on the list. But before we do that, given the back and forth here, and the fact that we're dealing with these dollar amounts, is there other comments from the Charter Review Committee?
Tom Lamarca here. Is there anyone else on the committee at this meeting? But my question is, or comment is, that this is really about the checks and balances of spending, and I for one would be against bumping that 10 to 20 to 50,000. I think that's going too far, even though that may be what the county does. They have a little bit more money than we do, and they've got different avenues of income. So that's my point, and we'll gather more information on what those spendings are.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point, Tom, that we can kind of vet this about what other cities are doing. We've been given one benchmark, which is how the county does it in the state. We can certainly look for other benchmarking so that we're kind of dialing in and have more information and have the full picture. Okay, others?
This is Kima, and I agree with pushing this forward. And I'm wondering if the city, if our group doesn't think that the county's amounts are acceptable, does the city have split the difference amount that they think would work better?
I don't want to.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Sorry, I should ask for permission.
No, that's okay.
I don't have a set number right now. I'm sure Mr. Klein can give us a rough guesstimate at the next meeting when we try to, fret this out more fully. But I just think the 50,000. The reason why we wanted to tie it to the county is that anytime that gets amended, then it would be amended as well. So we would tie it to the Ohio Revised Code, like 307.86, I believe what it is, off the top of my head. So that was the thought process there.
So, and if I could, through the chair, just to reiterate what Trevor said, I'd have no issue splitting the difference, but the key piece from our perspective is, and this is Eric, by the way, is if you don't link it in that way to the county, like I'm sure the 10,000 at one point wasn't a burdensomely low number, but the reality is because it's in the charter, it's very difficult to change that number. So there is a lot of value in tying it to the state and the county. That being said, if it weren't for that, I'd be very open to whatever compromise made sense would be a step forward. But I do think the commission should think about whether it's best to have it linked to a third party that can, in a responsible way, move it over time, as opposed to always having to rely on the voters and ending up in a situation where you maybe hold on to a low number for 10 or 20 years after it makes sense.
Okay. And so when we do bring this back, it would be helpful to have a little benchmarking and see how other communities that you would mark yourself against and whether or not they are indexing it to the state level or adopting theirs. That would be helpful information, it sounds like. If maybe Aaron can kind of pull that together, that seems like a good way to move forward. Okay, any other comments on that?
This is Melanie Murray.
Yep. Please.
As an employee for the government, I can see how this would be really restrictive. And it really does slow down the process. Ours is also $50,000, and it just creates such a long process, and projects that we aim to get completed take twice as long because of bidding out and everything like that. So I just think that, I don't know if it needs to be 50,000, but somewhere in the middle could work for everyone, I think.
Okay, thanks for that further input. Is there any further input, anything that you've heard that this has been an issue for people or anything like that, or for you personally, that you would like to bring to the attention of this group? Okay. All right, hearing none, I think what we need to do with that is put that on the list for further information to be brought back at a future meeting pursuant to how we've decided to kind of move through the charter. So is there any objection to doing that? And if I don't hear any, then that's we'll put it on that list. So I'll pause for a moment here. Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. Section 26, sinking fund trustees was repealed, and so there's no action to be taken there, which then takes us down to Section 27, civil service. And again, I would ask for you to bring forward any comments that you've received from the community on this, any comments you have yourself, or any requests for additional information that would help better illuminate what the issues are with respect to Section 27, which covers civil service.
Mr. Chairman, it's Trevor Hayberger.
Yep.
If I could have a second.
Yes, please do.
If you guys are looking at the screen there, the last two paragraphs, let's start off any active full-time law enforcement officer. Both of those paragraphs, the first paragraph is for the fire chief, or I'm sorry, for the police chief, and then the next one is for the fire chief. They're extremely I don't want to say burdensome over and over again, but they're difficult to work within our confines. Let's say today that John Orzak retires and we hire someone and they're in here for a year and they leave, John Orzak would not be able to reapply. He wouldn't be qualified because he wouldn't be an active full-time officer. So we have issues with the active full-time officer. And then inside of that, there's discussions of ranks of lieutenant. Now, that would be nice if everybody's lieutenant was the same thing across the state, but it's not. Sometimes a lieutenant in Sandusky would be the equivalent of a captain somewhere else. Those terms are not interchangeable. So we would ask to at least, everything else works fine. It's just if we could loosen up some of those restrictions on those two paragraphs and make it easier to find viable candidates.
Okay. And so are you suggesting, for instance, on the rank that it be the language would be tweaked, say, to provide for an equivalent to kind of thing?
Exactly.
Okay. And then is on the years of service, that would be that you just had to have, do you have a recommendation on that? Is it less years, or does it you don't have to be currently active versus being, you have the experience, you have 10 years experience, you just weren't, recently currently active. Which is the issue?
in our perspective, I think 10 years is fine. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wanting to be a chief of the police or chief of fire with less than 10 years. It's the active full-time officer that's an issue. And it says at the time of employment too, or at the time of application. So it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, okay. All right, so if you just remove the word active, 10 years of prior full-time service as a firefighter?
Exactly.
Or police, okay. Okay, well, thank you for that input. We appreciate it. Anything else, Trevor?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so having heard that and calling that out, does that engender any comments from the committee?
Tom Lamarca again.
Hey, Tom.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Trevor, if I go along with your train of thought, however, if, for example, and just as an example, we use Chief Horzak, he's out of the active duty line of a law enforcement officer for perhaps, say, 5 years as an assistant city manager or whatever position, or beer truck driver for that matter, I don't care. But then the chief of police slot opens back up, and I mean, I think we need to have at least something there that doesn't run. He's not been active for 10 years. He's.
So something along the lines of you have a total of 10 years of active experience, of prior experience, and that you've been actively employed in that capacity within the prior 3 years or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Well, I just don't want someone that's been inactive. They were active for 10 years, and then they were inactive, totally doing nothing out on a fishing boat, and then decides to come back and become a police chief again. That's all.
Yeah.
10 years.
I hear the point. No, I hear the point. Okay.
So I don't know what the proper wording would be for that, but we have to protect everybody on that, which is a benefit to the community.
Yeah. Trevor, do you have any reaction to that? Like if there was, you pointed out like that a minor gap in service disqualifies folks. Would you agree that as Mr. Lamarca is kind of suggesting, that you have to be active within a period of time before that? Is that an acceptable kind of, is that a workable paradigm from your perspective?
Absolutely. There is qualifications for them to keep their OPATA certification, but that can be done on a reserve basis, so that's not really full-time. But I definitely agree that times change, and if you're out of the loop for 5 years, yeah, that's probably not someone you're going to want. So I would agree to some limitation there.
Okay, that seems to make sense. So others, other comments on this? Because this does come up from time to time, and when we're hiring a fire chief or a police chief, it's an event, sure, in the history of the cities.
What else should people know about the Hall of Fame?
This is Connor Whalen, and I think we're going in our list to talk more about in the future, so maybe we could wait on some of this, but what jumped out to me is maybe something like active full-time duty for 10 of the last 15 years. And then that would allow for gaps and for perhaps stepping away currently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a construct to be considered, for sure. And you're right. We did I had this one flagged, and I think that's why, Trevor and Eric are on the line. There are some of these that we definitely said that we would come back for further discussion, given, the circumstances that we're in. I think we're framing these up. And so it's good to continue to point that out, that this was one that we said we'd have more discussion about. It sounds like we need it, and that we'll be able to kind of to sort through this and maybe come up with a construct that works for everyone. So again, I'm going to ask, is there anybody else that wants to comment on this? I thought I heard someone in the background asking a question there earlier, but I couldn't quite pick it up. Okay, hearing none, I think section 27, we would put that in the, for a future meeting and on further discussion, consistent with, to further ferret out the issues that we just discussed. Okay, that takes us to section 28, which is other boards and departments. And again, I would open the floor up for any input that people have received from the community or that they would like to offer the committee, or a request for further information to help us better understand this provision as we decide whether or not a change may be recommended. And again, as a reminder, if you're not speaking, put your phone on mute because there will be a lot of feedback. Section 28, any comments? All right, hearing none, then I would put that in the category again of no changes recommended. And again, that's for section 28, other boards and departments. Now, pause for a moment to see if there's any objection. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to section 29, which is advisory boards. Again, I would ask if there's anyone who wants to offer any feedback that they've received from the community or that they would like to offer this committee, or request for additional information to be brought forward to help us better evaluate whether or not a change is necessary. Okay, hearing none, I would again recommend that we put this in the category of no changes recommended. And again, it's for section 29, advisory boards. And I'll pause for a moment to allow objection to that classification. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on now to section 30, which is salaries and bonds. And I will ask if there's any comments from the community or from any of the committee members, or if there's a need for any additional information. Okay, hearing none, I would recommend that we put that in we classify that as in the category of no changes recommended for section 30, salaries and bonds. And I will pause for objection here. Hearing none, we'll move on to section 31, city manager appointment. And again, ask if there's any feedback from the community or personally you would like to bring anything forward for discussion, or if there's a need for any additional information with regard to section 31, city manager, the appointment of the city manager.
Tom,
Okay.
I'm here.
Yes, Tom.
The only thing I notice is that the city manager need not be required to be a city resident at the time he applies for the appointment, but I don't know that it states anywhere when they must become a resident. So shouldn't it state somewhere, and perhaps it does and I've missed it, that upon appointments, city manager, and I know we don't have a problem today, but I'm looking 5 years, 10 years, whatever down the road, if this all sticks together, that the city manager, upon its appointment, shall move into the city within 6 months, 9 months, what have you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, Trevor, are you still on?
Yes, I can answer that.
Yeah, please.
Section 86, further along in the charter, has a residency requirements. The issue with that is many times those have been struck down as unconstitutional. There was a big case with firefighters probably a good decade, if not longer ago, that said residency requirements are unconstitutional, but I can look into it further.
Just curious.
Okay. So the point of that provision in there is it allows for a broader pool of applicants because they don't have to be residents at the time. And then the construct is that they would become residents with, notwithstanding what you just said, Trevor, it may be with the massive caveat that the law may not allow us to require that. But to the extent that the law would, it is in there in Section 86. Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that explanation. And Tom, thank you for bringing that issue up so that we could clarify it. Any other comments on this section? Okay, hearing none, and with that explanation, I would categorize this as one that put in the category of no changes recommended. Again, that's Section 31, City Manager Appointment. And I would, I'll pause here for any objection to that classification. Okay, moving on then to Section 32, Powers and Duties of the City Manager. Again, I'll ask, are there any comments that people would like to make from their own perspective or from their constituents who have asked them to opine on this, or any requests for additional information? Again, Section 32, dealing with the powers and duties of the City Manager. Okay, and just as a reminder, we did get there was a comment that was put in by Mr. Schwanger on this one that we read into the record earlier. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we did get a comment from the public. And so, you know, along those lines, we want to acknowledge that we received that. And everybody's had a chance to consider that. And so at this time, with that having been noted, I would say, given that we've not heard any commentary from the group or any additional comments from the public, that this would fall in the category of no changes recommended by this body. But and again, it's Section 32, Powers and Duties of the City Manager. But I want to pause if there's any objection to doing that, given that we did receive a comment from the public. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Section 33, Heads of Departments. And again, I'll ask for any feedback from the public or that you've received from the public or that you would like to offer, or any requests for additional information with regard to Section 33, Heads of Departments. Okay, hearing none, I again would recommend that we put that in the category no changes recommended, and I will pause here for objection to that classification. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Section 34, Platting Commissioner. And again, I'll ask for any feedback you've received from the public that you would like to bring forward, or any of you, any commentary you would like to offer, or request for any additional information on Section 34, Platting Commissioner. Okay, hearing none, I would suggest that we put that in the category of no changes recommended. And again, I'll pause for objection to that categorization. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Section 2, Improvements and Contracts. The first one under that is Section 35, Limitation of Assessments. Again, I'll ask, are there any comments, questions, further information requested, or input from the public that anyone would like to bring forward at this time? All right, hearing none, I would suggest we put Section 35, Limitation of Assessments, in the category of no changes recommended. I'll pause here for objection. Hearing none, we'll put that in that category. Next is section 36, improvements by direct labor. And again, I will ask if there's any comments from you or from the public that you would like to bring forward, or any requests for additional information. Hearing none, I would suggest that we put section 36, improvements by direct labor, in the category of no changes recommended. I'll pause for objection. Hearing none, we'll move on to section 37, which is sewer, water, and gas connections. And I will ask for any feedback from the committee, any feedback that's been provided to you by the public, or any requests for additional information on section 37, sewer, water, and gas connections.
Mr. Chair, this is Adam Whalen. This one I would like to look a little bit more at. I don't know exactly how I would want to tweak it, but it seems as if in the wrong, I understand the purpose of it. You know, you don't want somebody to go in and tear up a new street when they could have done it right before. But I can think of a lot of scenarios where within 5 years, circumstances can change. And I see that, you know, 4 commissioners can overrule it and allow it. And so I think we could work around it without changing it, but it seems like it could be better.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, almost exactly what you just said, and I felt a little bit better because you have the consent of the 4 city commissioners. But it may be worth discussing, maybe fleshing out a little bit more of the circumstances that would, you know, kind of lead to an approval. So there's a little more information for people. So I've got that down. Other comments on that from anyone?
Lamarca here. I thought it could be tweaked as well, but I thought it was close enough.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one, or feel that it needs to be tweaked? And remember, if you're talking, you take yourself off mute so that we can hear you. Okay. Hearing none, I will suggest that we put that section 37, sewer, water, and gas connection, into of further. And I'll pause for objection to that classification at this time. Okay. All right. Then moving on to section 38, expenditures in excess of $2,500. That has been amended and made part of section 25, so there's no action to make there. Section 39, time of making contracts. Again, I would ask if there's any comments that you want to bring forward from the community, or from yourself, or request for any additional information. Hearing none, I would suggest that section 39, time of making contracts, be put in the category of no changes recommended. And I'll pause here for objection. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to section 40, modifications of contracts. And again, ask if there's any commentary from the public that you want to bring forward, or any comments you want to make, or any requests for additional information. Okay, hearing none, I would recommend that we put this in the category of no changes recommended, and that's for section 40, modifications of contracts. And I'll pause here for objection. Hearing none, we'll move on to section 41, which is bids in excess of estimate. And again, I would ask for any comments that you've received from the public, or any comments you'd like to make, or request for additional information. Okay, hearing none, I would recommend that we put section 41, bids in excess of estimate, in the category of no changes recommended. And I'll pause for objection. Hearing none, we'll move on to section 42, which is contracts when void. And I'll ask if there's been any comments you've received from the public, any comments you would like to make, or a request for any additional information with respect to section 42 contracts when void. Hearing none, I would suggest we put section 42 contracts when void into the category of no changes recommended. I'll pause for objection to that categorization. Hearing none, we'll move on to section 43, general disqualifications. We did get a public comment on this from Mr. Schwanger that was read into the record earlier, just for your, to refresh your memory on that. We read that at the beginning of the meeting. And so I would ask again, is there any additional information that you would like to bring forward for that the public has provided to you, or that you want to provide to this group, or a request for any additional information with respect to section 43, general disqualifications? Okay, hearing none, I would recommend that we put section 43, general disqualifications, into the category of no changes recommended. Okay, so that brings us to the end of where we wanted to get tonight in the charter. And so I just want to make a process point here for purposes of to make sure that the public at large understands our process. So as we went through that, we were sorting through the things that we needed to have additional conversations on and those that we did not. And I worked that by virtue of saying that, pronouncing a category to put the particular provision in, and then working through it by objection, and hearing none, we put it in that category. When this process is complete, there will be a voice vote on all provisions. That will accumulate everything that we've talked about, but I just want to make sure that both the committee and the public understand that we're sorting through these right now, and that we will ensure that the process involves a voice vote of everyone on the committee, such that if someone were to come back later and say, hey, I really do want to talk about that opportunity still exists. This was more of an organizational process than than any final vote. On those issues. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, so that everybody kind of understands the process and how we'll be moving forward. So I'll pause there and see if that engendered any questions or comments on that process. Okay, hearing none, that moves us to old business on the agenda. There are no items listed under old business. Does anyone have any old business that they would like to raise at this time? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to number 7, which is new business. And there are no items on the agenda for new business, but I will ask this group, are there any items of new business that anyone would like to bring before this meeting? Okay, hearing none, that takes us to the next meeting, which is May 13th, 2020, which Ms. Presser sent out a note that I couldn't make it till 6 p.m. I actually was able to get my schedule changed, so I can make it at 5 p.m. so we can hold it at the same time. And so unless that now creates any scheduling conflict for anyone, I think we can move that back to our normal starting time, unless, Kelly, you tell me that we've already made the other arrangements and it would be, a burden to change it back.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear objection from anyone one way or the other. I did send a note out that the time had changed, but that would be a simple email if you want to change it back to 5, whatever the preference of the group is.
Yeah, I just didn't want to inconvenience everybody just for me, so I appreciate it, but we can keep the regular order. Okay. All right. Hearing none, thank you. And so then as a process point, just as we did our next, between now and the next meeting, Ms. Presser will provide us with the minutes from this meeting, and we'll also update the check sheet that we have on the charter that signifies those items that we've set aside for further discussion. And then we'll update that. And I think at the next meeting, probably one of the items of business we'll want to go over is I would like to put this on the agenda, just kind of have that running total of what those are. I know we have that, but I think it's important to mention those for public consumption. And so tonight, the outcome of tonight's meeting is we set aside for further discussion section 17 and section 18, which is about the appointment of the law director and the finance director. We set aside section 25 on expenditures, section 27 on civil service, and section 37, which was sewer, water, and gas connections. All those will have further discussion or require further information to be provided by the city administration or others. And so those now on our list, as we've gotten through number 43, provision 43, we have, by my count, 11 items, but section 13, 14, 15 are all kind of the ordinances and publication. So we got about 9 or 10 items on our to-do list. So just keep track of that to make sure that we are making progress and we don't end up with a to-do list that's too long. So I think we should put those on there the next time. Hopefully we'll have a little bit better idea when we can get together in person. Having gone through this process here, I think it is important that those items that merit more discussion should be done in person if at all possible to facilitate the greatest amount of participation of the people on this, that have been appointed to this committee. So I will hold those. I think we should hold those until such time as we can do that, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later. So with that, I will ask one last time if there's any additional comments for the good of the order. And hearing none, I would entertain a motion in a second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, Alex Jones.
Thank you. Second?
Lisa Sortino.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, hearing none, I'll wish everyone a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Duff.